So the question right now is, do we see a pattern beginning with Jefferson and coming into the mid and late 20th century? Well, let's finish this off by, it's almost an overworked quote, but it was spoken by John F. Kennedy, April 27th, 1961, at the Waldorf Astoria. And of course, you can find this, if you've never heard this before, which I find unlikely, you can find this online. But let's break this down in light of this thread that we have discussed so far. And he's going to, of course, say, we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. Let's just stop for a second. We, I believe he's speaking of we, the Americans, we a free people. We are opposed. There are some people in opposition to our liberties and our freedoms. Jefferson spoke about that. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic, it's united, and ruthless, will do anything, think of Machiavelli, means to an end to achieve its goals. Conspiracy. And if you're not aware of this, this word of conspiracy was part of popular parlance. It was a completely normal term. It was used in newspapers, everyday fashion. It was used in political analysis right up until the JFK time. And you can see this through CIA documents, 1963, 65, and 67. The idea that it would be programmed in through the media and other educational institutions, this word conspiracy theorist, in response to people theorizing about what JFK was up to. So a ruthless conspiracy that relies on covert means, secrecy. Remember Peter Dale Scott's, one of his elements of the deep state, it operates through secrecy. Its sphere of influence on infiltration instead of invasion. Remember what Jefferson and Jackson said and Lincoln said, more dangerous than standing armies, because you can see the enemy in front of you if you have a standing army. This is much more subtle, this covert method of infiltration. And infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, to subvert a people, their values, their ideas, and perceptions. On intimidation instead of free choice. Remember the quotes that we've had from Wilson and Harlan back, that you dare to even speak of this power except perhaps under your breath. On guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political organizations. He's talking about here something like maybe Dwight Eisenhower would call the military-industrial complex, but he's talking about full spectrum domination at a world level. Now, what's funny about this quote, it was said shortly before he was assassinated, why is it only in fringe circles that this gets mentioned? Why do we not talk about this in school? Why do we not talk about this in political science? People can't square it, so it's dismissed, and it's just not talked about. That happens from occasion to occasion. There is a conspiracy, he says, to as Jefferson would say, as Jackson would say, as Lincoln would say, as Garfield would say, that was targeted against humanity and their freedoms. And so what's the other pattern we get? Well, there was many attempted assassinations on Jackson. The ones on Garfield and McKinley were successful. And of course, the one here on John F. Kennedy was successful. So when we think about the relationship of the deep states and the U.S. presidents, we see this consistent thread of presidents that at least rhetorically spoke in a consistent fashion that there is an invisible government. They're the people that control the money supply and the corporations, the monopolies, the trusts around us, and they function as an invisible government. And if there wasn't any power that they had absolutely usurped by 1913 with the induction of the Federal Reserve System, it was fait accompli after that. So what does that mean? That we have in the democratic process, the right, the left, the blue party, the red party are both controlled lock, stock, and barreled. And I know you can find this information anywhere, but what we're doing is within the realm of scholarly material and scholarly processes demonstrating that yes, this country, and in fact the democracies of the world, are oligarchies in every sense. Democracies are election-run political processes that have fair and frequent elections that are meaningful. So if we don't see an empirical relationship because the outcomes of our capitals and their legislatures with the people's preferences, that means they're not meaningful. There's not a correlation between what people want and the policies that they're getting. That means empirically we're run by an oligarchy, that's demonstrable, and that it squares with this evidence that we're seeing of the rhetorical comments by everybody from presidents to British prime ministers to Supreme Court justices, consistently pointing to a power in the world that seeks to usurp the liberties of free people. And so when we further discuss this, we have to think about this as an overarching apparatus. So when Dwight D. Eisenhower spoke about this in his farewell address, he called it the military-industrial congressional complex, and we can add on to that the pharmaceutical complex, the telecommunication complex, the media complex. And so you're getting the idea that it's a complex, it's a matrix. Everything has been included into it, and it operates, as Kennedy said, covertly. And I would suggest at this point that the idea that whether we see it on the news, popular presentations of how the world works, how our schools function, when we see this presentation of democracy and so frankly just the cave paintings, I think in our minds it's time to flatly reject this, even if you don't want to speak out about it. The deep state is the government. So the question at this point is, what is their endgame? All the presidents say they're out to subvert our form of government and deprive us of our liberties. And that has been done slowly but surely. We can see it through the escalation of personal income tax, and that our vote is less and less meaningful. And the fact that most people, for example, out of 95 people, out of 100 people, 95 people are unhappy with the performance of Congress. The laws that they're giving us are not the laws that we want. 5% of American people, this is over 20 years of being surveyed, 5% of people are happy with the lawmakers. The democracy is not functioning. It's not valid. It's not meaningful for it. We live in an oligarchy. So let's start thinking about it. What is it they want other than taking our freedoms? What is their end game here? And to look at what their end game is, we're going to have to see that they have a worldview, and it's an esoteric worldview. It means that they operate, as Kennedy just suggested, they operate covertly and secretly, but they do have a game plan, and that game plan is something that was in part mentioned by Machiavelli in The Prince, a way they rule, but there's an end to all this. And that's what I can't stress before. But once we get that their worldview has an eschatology, it has an end game, a place where they want to push the economic, industrial, cultural, and private perceptions of mankind toward training it upon their vision of the future. And I want now to start to explore that vision of the future